Namaste, dear students. Welcome back again. So, today we are going to discuss the topic that is the differences between equity shares and preference shares. So, here in the slide, I have made it in a key points. So, let us look into it. Equity shares, first one, and the second one is preference shares, which I have highlighted at the bottom of the slide. So equity shares point 1 says nominal value is lower. Usually the value, that is the nominal value of equity shares, is always less when you compare to the preference shares. And when coming to the preference shares, the nominal value of a preference shares is always higher than the equity shares. And in equity shares, dividend varies according to profit. So on the basis of profit, every time if there is profit, then only dividend will be declared for the equity shareholders. So which I have already said, if there is a more profit, more dividend declaration. If it is less profit, less dividend declaration. So that means profit or so-called dividend here fluctuating. It keeps on fluctuating year to year. So under preference shares, the rate of dividend is always fixed. So it is a constant. Say for example, 12% dividend. So 12% preference share means 12% dividend is fixed. Clear? So whether the company earns more profit, whether the company earns less profit, so the dividend for the preference shareholders is fixed at 12%. So company has to pay at the rate of 12%. So next is no right for arrears of dividend. So under equity shareholders, they do not enjoy any kind of arrears for dividend. That means if the company is not accumulating or the company is not under profit in the present year, so those earned profit will be carried forward for the next year only in the case of preference shares. But in the equity shares, in the case of equity shares, such kind of carry forward is not allowed. Clear? So under preference share, that is cumulative preference shares get arrears. So we have already told that many times in at the time of explanation. I have told that all the preference shares are in nature cumulative preference shares, I told. So all the preference shares will have the arrears will be carried forward to the next subsequent year. Which arrears it is? It is dividend arrears. So next is for equity shareholders, no priority in dividend and repayment of capital. So because equity shareholders are the last priority will be given for dividend distribution, and at the same time the settlement of shares also. Suppose the company is getting closed, they will be given last priority. Clear? The last preference will be given to the equity shareholders, whereas the preference shareholders, the first priority in dividend and repayment of capital will be given to the preference shareholders only. So next is it cannot be redeemed. Equity shares cannot be redeemed. So as I said, company will not pay back the capital which is paid by the equity shareholders. Clear? But in preference shares, it can be redeemed only when it is clearly mentioned in articles of association, or it has to be issued as a redeemable preference shares. So in such a case, it can be redeemed. So preference shares can be redeemed, whereas equity shares cannot be redeemed. And under equity shares, there is more risk involved. Clear? So why more risk involved in equity shareholders or equity share investment? Because see, the rate of dividend is not fixed. If company goes under loss, so then the equity shareholder will not get any kind of dividend, and their profit is also not carried for the subsequent years or the next coming years. If company is closing down, even in that case also, the equity shareholders will be given last priority. Clear? So that is why the risk involved in this equity shares is more. Clear? So whereas in preference shares, the risk is very less or lower because they have a fixed rate of dividend which can be carried forward for the next subsequent year if the company fails to earn a very good percentage of profit. And at the same time, at the time of winding up of a company, at the time of closing down of a company, first priority will be given to preference shareholders. At the time of dividend distribution, first priority will be given to preference shareholders. So obviously the risk is lower here. Next is equity shareholders. So they have voting rights. So they have wider voting rights. They can participate in board of directors meeting. So they can express their opinion through vote. Clear? So but whereas preference shares, even they do have voting rights, but it is a limited, not the wider perspective or not the wider way of voting right as equity shareholders has. So next, control over management. So equity shareholders will have a control over management. They can express their decision through votes. So whereas preference shareholders, as we said, their limitation is there in voting rights also. So they cannot control management through vote. So highly speculative in nature, that is every now and then people will buy and sell the equity shareholders in the share market. So that is what speculative, so which is in transaction always. And whereas preference shares is very less speculative. Once you invested, you are going to keep it aside because you have a fixed rate of dividend. So you have a preferential rights in everything. So obviously it is not purely speculative in nature. So whereas equity shares are ready to take risk and to get greater dividend prefer this. So the people who wants to take are ready to take high risk and wants to enjoy high rate of returns, they always prefer equity shares because we have already discussed. Say for example, company have earned 80% of profit. So out of 20% profit is declared, a dividend declared for preference shares. So the left 60% is distributed among equity shares. So for that, the people should get ready to take a risk only in such a cases. So they can invest in equity shares. So whereas preference shares not ready to take risk and express a steady income prefer this. One who are not ready to take extra risk and at the same time one who wanted to earn a fixed rate of return, so they always prefer preference shares. So these are the major differences between equity shares and preference shares. So now we are done with the differences between equity shares and preference shares. So further we are moving on towards the next topics, which is again very important to understand. So let us understand first under subscription. What is exactly under subscription? So then we will go for over subscription, then pro rata, so on. Okay. So here over subscription is and under subscription are the two different cases where equity shareholders will apply for the shares in a company. So now I am going to discuss about under subscription case. So in under subscription, what happens? So see, the company have invited applications for 10,000 equity shares. Take as an example, Gagana and company of Mandya have invited 10,000 equity shares of rupees 100 each. But here, the public have applied only for 8,000 shares. How much Gagana and company have, invited application for how many shares? It is 10,000. But public applied for how many shares? 8,000 shares. Clear? So that means demand for that shares is very less in the market. So that is why 2,000 shares have not applied. So this is what we call it as a under subscription. I believe you have understood with the example. Clear? So where the company invites application for the issue of shares, if public applies less than the company invited, is called under subscription. So I believe it is very clear now with the example. So next we are moving on towards oversubscription. So what is this oversubscription? See, it is very simple, opposite of undersubscription. In under subscription, what happened exactly? Public applied for 10,000 shares. Clear? Public applied for 10,000 shares. Company invited 10,000 shares, but public applied for 8,000 shares. So it is opposite of this means. So say take example now. Mandya company have invited 10,000 application for shares, but public applied for 12,000 shares. So that is called oversubscription. See, when the shares are oversubscribed, so you have to understand, when the public applies for the shares more than the company issued, is exactly we call it as a oversubscription. Clear? So when the shares are oversubscribed to the company cannot issue shares to all the participants or all the applicants. At such a time, the company may allot shares to the applicants on pro rata basis. Pro rata allotment means allotment in proportion of shares applied. In pro rata allotment, the excess application money received is adjusted against the amount due on allotment or calls. Surplus money after making adjustment against future calls is returned to the applicants. When there is a pro rata allotment, the total application money paid by an applicant is more than the exact amount due on application. The excess amount is treated as an advance against allotment money. So here you have to understand what is this pro rata allotment. So when the public have applied for more shares than the company invited, in such a case, so that shares applied and available shares will be allotted on a pro rata basis. See, for example, so the public who have applied for 12 shares, they will be allotted 10 shares. One who have applied for 6 shares, they will be allotted 5 shares. So this is what exactly we call it as a pro rata allotment. So when public is already paid, the money, so in such a case, that paid money, whatever paid money, if it is more than the application money, that more money whatever paid by the applicants, so that will be adjusted for future calls, like allotment, first call, second and final call. So we receive as a advance amount from the public. So this you are going to understand at the time of solving the problem. So once we start solving the solution part, so you will understand this in very clarity. Okay, so this is what we call it as a oversubscription, pro rata allotment. So next further we are moving on towards calls in arrears. So it is an amount not received when demanded by the company. See, calls in arrears means, as I said, the entire capital cannot be collected in one short payment. So we divide the capital into 4 calls. So that is what I have explained already also. Say for example, the face value of a share is 10 rupees and 2 rupees we receive on application, 3 rupees on allotment, and 2.5 on first call and 2.5 on second call. So we have made 4 different installments. So the shareholder have paid call money, that is application money, he has paid allotment money, he has paid first call money. But he fails to pay second and final call. That is a part of the capital which he is supposed to pay. Clear? So in such a case, his shares can be cancelled by the company, and that unpaid money is exactly, we call it as a calls in arrears. Calls in arrears, it is an amount not received when demanded by the company. Next, we are moving further on forfeiture of shares. So, what is this forfeiture of shares? Failure to pay call money results in forfeiture of shares. Forfeiture of shares is the action taken by a company to cancel the shares. So that is what I used to tell. Cancellation of shares is nothing but forfeiture of shares. Okay. So shares are forfeited. The title of such a shareholder is extinguished, but the amount paid is not returned to them. So that means the cancellation of shares will be done, but whatever the amount paid by the shareholders will not be refunded to them. Shareholder has no further claim on the company. In case of forfeiture, the share capital account will be debited with the called up value of shares forfeited. Allotment or calls account will be credited with the amount due, but not paid by the shareholders. So you have to understand that for forfeiture, we are going to cancel the shares when a shareholders fails to pay call money. Clear? So that is what forfeiture of shares. So next is a reissue of forfeited shares. So reissue of forfeited shares is nothing but the cancelled shares will be reissued to the other person. So as a new issue, we are going to issue those shares, but we cannot give or issue those shares for the complete face value. Usually that is less than the face value. So that is what we are going to adjust from this money which we have forfeited from the existing shareholders. So out of that money, so the loss, whatever issue or discount, that discount will be recovered to the company. And this is also you are going to understand at the time of solving the problem. Okay, so today we are understood about the differences between equity shares and preference shares, and also you have understood what is under subscription, what is over subscription, pro rata allotment, forfeiture of shares, and a reissue of forfeited shares. So I'm stopping here. So from next class onwards, we are going to start solving practical problems. So we are going to solve the problems from the next video. So thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye. See you soon and stay safe.